Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, unwanted pets and relatives, greetings and hello. It is I, your favorite undocumented conservative social studies teacher with just above average looks, intelligence, and style, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, folks. The dozens of you scattered throughout the towns and villages from coast to coast, and the 3 or 4 guys across the oceans. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. I've got a banger of a show for you guys today, something that has been bouncing around deep in the crevasses of my fertile mind, and now it is time to bring it forth, kind of like in the movie Man of Steel, where Doomsday comes out of the Kryptonium goo chamber and, well, actually, maybe that's not a good idea, but I'm excited for this show. It is something I have been working on, and I hope it comes out the way I want it to. You know, sometimes I do a podcast and I think it's great, and, the audience, not so much. Sometimes I do a podcast and I think it's terrible and the audience loves it. This one, I think, is going to answer a lot of your questions about what is going on in American politics today. If you'd like to email the show, the email is professorliberty1776@gmail.com. That's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Send me your thoughts, your concerns, your prayers, your predicaments, your papers and effects. You just want to say hello, whatever. You just got to send that to professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Also, guys, we have almost 150 podcast episodes. So don't hesitate to go deep into the Professor Liberty archives. We've got U.S. history, we've got economics, we've got world history, we've got important battles, we've got interesting concepts like propaganda, doom scrolling. Anything you want to learn, go into the archive for free. It's like a public library here. The Professor Liberty Public Library. Go back and check out some old episode videos. All right. Now, some of you guys might remember a few years ago, I did a podcast called American Politics is Like Baseball. And to be honest, I wasn't super happy with that episode. I didn't think it was going to do very well. And just like I said earlier, I don't get to control what the audience enjoys and what it doesn't enjoy. And that episode did quite well. Anyway, in that episode, I used a baseball analogy to describe what politics in America is like. Well, we are going to do that again today. Today's episode is called Why American Politics is Like Professional Wrestling. Now, before we get into this comparison, we need to take a little bit, we need to do a little terminology. We need to talk about professional wrestling itself. Now, I am personally a professional wrestling fan. I've always been a fan. You know, like most people, I maybe have taken a break in my late teens, early 20s. But then I had a son and he was young, and wrestling is fun. Wrestling is about entertainment. A lot of people think, well, it's just fake fighting. But it actually has a pretty interesting history. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, wrestling was promoted as a legitimate athletic contest. Wrestlers would travel from town to town, competing at carnivals, county fairs, and sporting events. The problem was that real wrestling matches are unpredictable. They could drag on for hours, they can end in draws, or they can last a few seconds, and you spent all that money. Promoters started to figure out that if they controlled the outcome, create colorful personalities, and build dramatic rivalries and storylines, they could put on a much better show. Before long, professional wrestling had evolved into something that wasn't just about who was the better wrestler. It was about telling a story and making people come back for more week after week. Someone on social media actually made this point. It was a big UFC fight. I'm not a UFC guy. I know a lot of my friends are. But there was a UFC fight. It was a big build-up just a couple weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. I think it was the ladies. Anyway, it lasted like 20 seconds. And this guy on social media, he said he can see the value of WWE because the fights are drawn out and dramatic. In other words, they're more entertaining than legitimate fights that can last a few seconds, and you spent a lot of money for that spectacle. Now, remember I mentioned that professional wrestling got its starts in carnivals and county fairs. This is important to remember. This is the same place where you would find freak shows, fun houses, strong men, magic acts. In other words, places built around illusion and spectacles of grandeur, and keeping the audience wondering what's real and what isn't. This is important because professional wrestling isn't necessarily about convincing you it's a legitimate contest. It's about keeping the illusion. It's about suspending belief, right? Suspending your disbelief. It's just like when you go watch a movie. You know, people that don't like professional wrestling will say, oh, you watch that fake stuff? Well, did you just get done watching The Avengers? How was that flying aircraft carrier with the big giant green monster that has laser beams coming out of his butt? How was that a good movie? It's about entertainment, folks. It's about suspending disbelief and having a good time. And we know what else they have at carnivals, right? The game. Carnival games are designed to feel winnable, but they're actually very controlled. So professional wrestling has evolved into this form of entertainment where the outcome is controlled, but the experience is designed to feel unpredictable, but real, emotionally real. And this is an important point. Okay, before we can compare politics to professional wrestling, let's look at some key terms. The first two terms, if you're a professional wrestler guy, you need to know are heels and babyfaces. A babyface, or just face, is the good guy, the hero you're supposed to root for. They're portrayed as honorable, courageous, and they're fighting for what's right. The heel is the villain. They're arrogant, deceitful, willing to cheat, bend the rules, do whatever it takes to win. The whole point is to get the crowd emotionally invested. You're not supposed to cheer for the heel. You're supposed to cheer for the babyface. You're supposed to boo the heel. Without that conflict, there is no story. Now remember that, boys and girls. Remember that throughout the podcast. Without the good side and the bad side, the good team and the bad team, the red team and the blue team, right? Without the teams, without the babyface and the heel, there is no story. There is no reason to be emotionally invested. Just for fun, some other terms that we'll probably talk about, maybe not. Some other terms that are helpful for this concept of pro wrestling is getting over. A wrestler that is getting over simply means that the audience has bought into the character. Then there's pop. That's the big positive reaction when the character comes out. The opposite of pop is heat. Heat is a negative reaction. The boos, the jeers, the anger, throwing stuff. If a heel is doing his job or her job, they are despised. They're doing their job. Remember this. Now, what ties all this together is a term called kayfabe. Interestingly, nobody knows exactly where this word comes from, but historians believe it originated in the carnival world somewhere in the early 20th century. One popular theory is that it evolved from Pig Latin for the phrase be fake. Kayfabe is the unwritten agreement to preserve the performance. The wrestlers, the promoters, the announcers, everyone plays their part to maintain the story. Heroes stay heroes, villains stay villains, rivalries are treated as real, even though everyone knows behind the scenes it's all part of the show. If kayfabe breaks down, the audience stops believing and the magic disappeared. Okay, two more terms. The next one is promo. A promo is a short promotional interview or speech. It's when a wrestler stands in front of an audience or a camera and cuts a speech designed to build excitement for an upcoming match. You're trying to sell tickets. You're trying to put butts in seats. You're establishing your character. You're insulting the opponent. You're getting cheers. You're getting boos. Well, most of the greatest matches in wrestling history come after great promos building up the upcoming conflict, right? The battle between good and evil. Promos are meant to build tension and interest in a new feud or an upcoming match. They're not just informal, they're emotional. A good promo stokes fear, excitement, anticipation, and sometimes outright anger. I wonder if our politicians today are cutting promos. We'll get to that later. And the last term I want to talk about is the turn. In professional wrestling, a turn is when a wrestler switches alignment. A babyface becomes a heel becomes a babyface. It's one of the most powerful storytelling tools in wrestling because it completely changes how the audience is meant to see a character, and it opens up new stories. Crowds get so invested in their wrestler, a turn can trigger some pretty extreme emotions: rage, hatred, disbelief. Because by that point, it's not just the character anymore, it's a personal thing. They're attached to these wrestlers. They're attached to these characters. ... They're attached to these politicians. And we're talking about the most famous example, this is just geeky pro wrestling stuff. Give me like 2 minutes. The famous example of the best heel turn is Hulk Hogan's heel turn at Bash of the Beach 1996. For years, Hulk Hogan was the ultimate babyface. Boys and girls of a certain age grew up idolizing him and cheering for him. And when he finally revealed himself as the third man in the formation of the New World Order, it didn't just surprise fans, it fundamentally broke their expectations. I mean, you guys go YouTube this. The crowd just lost it. They crashed out, as the young folks would say. They threw all of their junk into the ring. I mean, people just could not deal with it. They just couldn't get their minds around Hulk Hogan being a bad guy. Okay, so I set the table here. I gave us some terms, and I think some of these you guys already know where I'm going. But how is American politics like professional wrestling? Well, in our system, we effectively have two major political parties. And depending on who holds power, one is cast as the baby face and one is cast as the heel. Now, for the sake of the analogy, I would say whoever's in the White House is probably the heel, and whoever is chasing, here's another term, chasing and defending, whoever's chasing is probably the baby face. But I think that analogy could go either way, seeing that 50% of people hate the president and 50% of the people love the president. I guess it just depends on your point of view. The point is that, just like in wrestling, both sides spent a lot of time cutting promos on each other. Speeches, rallies, interviews, media appearances designed to frame the opponent in a certain light and rally their own base. One side will emphasize the dangers of their agenda. We can't let the Democrats take over. They're going to bring in socialism. We already have socialism. They're going to bring in more socialism. We can't let the Republicans win. They're going to reverse the rights of black people and women. We're literally going to go back to the 30s and 40s. It's a constant battle over perception. The ongoing story is who is the hero and who is the villain. Now, mind you, boys and girls, our leaders in both parties are all wealthy and they all know each other. They go to dinner parties, they shake hands, they laugh, they eat fine foods, they smoke cigars, they drink the best alcohol. They all call each other by their first names. All the while, us common folk are at each other's necks. We hate liberals. We hate conservatives. I can't stand white people. I can't stand black people. We're all at each other's necks while they keep the kayfabe, the illusion that they are in conflict with one another. Think about it, folks. Trump is back in the White House for 2 years now. What in your life has changed? Ever notice how the past 40 years, the president switches parties back and forth? Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. The only consistent thing we see and feel in this country, the culture and the economy are just getting worse and worse and worse. We're watching a pro wrestling show, folks. There's no other way to say it. Our political system is not real. It is a WWE production. Each party tries to paint the other as the heel, the bad guy, the villain. They pretend to hate each other. They cut promos on cable news. Just a few days ago, Stephen Miller, one of Trump's top aides, went on Fox and said something like, if the Democrats take over, that will be literally the end of the country. Dum, dum, dum. Pretty scary stuff, right? Now, never mind that the fact that the Trump administration is not doing well is because he's going back on all his promises. Never mind that. Never mind that. Let's not talk about what we're not doing, what we promised. Let's, again, point to the enemy. And let me ask you guys, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, if the Democrats took over, so what? What exactly is going to change? Someone explain to me, how is the status quo going to change? Groceries were expensive under Biden. Groceries are expensive under Trump. People can't afford a house under Biden. People can't afford a house under Trump. Inflation goes up under Biden. Inflation goes up under Trump. Billionaires and corporations influence our politicians under Biden. Billionaires and corporations influence our politicians under Trump. Now, some MAGA listeners out there might say, well, at least Trump closed the border. And yes, that's a good thing, of course. But you have to remember, the system relies on kayfabe to survive. The illusion has to show some differences between the parties. So they allow for little changes around the edges, little changes to make it look like things are happening, right? Some actions have to be taken. So when we have a Democrat in office, we celebrate Juneteenth and Pride Month. And when we have a Republican in office, we don't. You guys like that difference? Man, that is some stark difference right there, isn't it? However, no matter who's in charge, something keep happening. We keep having ballooning government debt. We have foreign entanglements. We have less freedom. We have a growing police state. And we have a lopsided economy. But we are told that there's something we can do in this struggle between good and evil. We're told we can participate by, quote, buying a ticket. In this case, buying a ticket means going out and voting. From a young age, Americans are taught that we live in a democracy and we get to choose our leaders through that process. It's presented as the moment where the audience becomes part of the show. You're not just watching the story unfold, you are part of the story. Here's the thing, folks. For anyone paying attention, evidence continues to be revealed that our elections are anything but free and fair. And it appears that both parties aren't serious about requiring a photo ID to vote. Now, Republicans control all branches of government, and for some reason, they can't pass the SAVE Act, which would require ID to vote. Why is that? Interesting. Is it because in reality, neither party wants a full, secure election? Is it because both parties want the ability to maintain the kayfabe, the illusion that we have a choice, but the reality, they want to have some control over who becomes president and who controls Congress? And what's really amazing to me is that we're so propagandized, we're so invested in our team, in our political party, in our favorite wrestler, our favorite character, that we just keep watching the show. You know, we talk about Trump derangement syndrome, people that just cannot stand Trump. Well, what about Trump devotion syndrome? I mean, I see the propagandists on social media constantly, comparing him to a messianic figure like he's Jesus. One post was, this is just Trump's story and we're all just, bystanders. What? So let me give you another example of the pro wrestling politics in our country. You remember the Supreme Court appointments, Trump's first term? Remember appointing Brett Kavanaugh Remember how contentious that was, the circus that ensued? Remember the liberals screaming off the top of their blue hair that he's going to roll back women's rights and minority rights? And remember, so that was a news cycle, right? Then he got appointed, and then it died down, right? On to the next storyline, on to the next feud, right? Well, it turns out Kavanaugh is rather moderate. According to the data, Justice Brett Kavanaugh is emerging as one of the court's median justices, and that he is replacing Justice Roberts as that deciding vote in many cases. In fact, this current court, even with the 2 Trump appointments, has ruled against him about 55 to 60% of the time. So what was all the chaos about, folks? Why all the protests? Why were we cutting promos, boys and girls? It was the corporate media selling tickets. In wrestling, as we mentioned earlier, the promo exists to sell the match. In politics, the entire media ecosystem has become the promo machine. In this ecosystem, the reward goes to whoever can generate the strongest reaction, not necessarily the clearest argument or even the most effective policy. Another example of this is when we were at war. Iraq, Afghanistan. During the height of war, you got to hear about all the casualties, all the destruction, all of the things going on, right? The new constitution, the new government, right? The different factions. And then nothing. When's the last time you heard about Iraq? Who's in charge over there? Thousands and thousands of men died. Billions of dollars spent. Well, we know who's in charge in Afghanistan. The same people that were there when we went over there. But anyway, you see what I mean, guys? It's just a promo. You move on to the next story. So the obvious question is, why does the illusion continue? It survives because everyone involved has an incentive to keep it going. The media benefits from conflict because conflict drives up ratings. The political campaigns benefit from it because conflict drives donations. Parties benefit from it because it contrasts the other guy, the villain, the babyface, the heel. Even voters, in a strange way, benefit from this system because it gives meaning and structure to what would otherwise feel like a chaotic system. In other words, the illusion holds because it's useful to everyone involved. So round and round we go, folks. The party in power constantly defending its record, its decisions, its legitimacy. The opposing party, is constantly chasing, framing itself as the alternative. And depending on where you are in that cycle, the entire narrative shifts. What was once a winning message becomes a liability. Which was once criticism becomes opportunity. So from the outside, it looks inconsistent. But in wrestling terms, guys, this is just a turn. The parties take turns making a turn. That sounds terrible, right? One party's the babyface, one party is the heel, and then they switch. And in the meantime, the economy is worse, social problems aren't really addressed, we can't afford basic things in life, we can't afford health care, our kids are more illiterate every year. Now, I know some of you guys are going to say, well, you're just being a conspiracy theorist, Mr. Palumbo. Well, let me ask you some questions. Why doesn't Trump want to find out more about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania with his attempted assassination? Doesn't that seem odd? If our elections are free and fair, why do Republicans keep winning on election day, but then they lose many days later after the mail-in ballots are counted? Have Democrats ever lost a mail-in ballot count? Where did Joe Biden's 81 million votes go in 2020? How did Kamala Harris simply receive the Democrat nomination in 2020? Isn't there a convention primary process? Why do politicians get richer and richer after being elected to public office? And why do presidential candidates always run on a peace platform, yet we seem to be constantly at war? And here's the $1 million question, ladies and gentlemen. Why hasn't anyone of influence been arrested for corruption. Trump says the 2020 election was stolen. Where are the arrests? Epstein files. Where are the arrests? The COVID shot killed millions of people. Economies were destroyed. Lives were destroyed. Where are the arrests? George W. Bush lied about there being weapons of mass destruction. Where are the arrests? The list goes on, folks. And maybe that's the real difference between wrestling and politics. At least in wrestling, the heel eventually loses. The good guy eventually wins. Order is restored. And maybe that's what makes it an illusion. In politics, we keep waiting for that moment. We keep waiting for policies to be enacted and promises to be kept. But instead, roles shift, characters rotate, and the story continues. Because the match only matters if the crowd stays invested. The promo only works if people believe in it. And the illusion only holds as long as the audience keeps playing along. And the real question is, what happens when the audience wakes up and stops cheering? Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. You can push this platform further if you give me a written review, or give me a written review on any podcast platform that has this podcast. Go ahead and help me out. If you'd like to help me out financially, go to teacherspayteachers.com, where you will find lessons and activities for your homeschool or classroom needs, things that I use in my own classroom, things that I have made and put together. You can do that, and you can help financially support Professor Liberty. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.